Quick question. How many of you watching this have more than one diagnosis? ADHD and autism, autism and OCD, all three, plus anxiety, plus depression, maybe something else on top? If you raised your hand, even mentally, you're not the exception. You're actually extremely common. And the reason so many of us end up with multiple diagnoses isn't because we're unusually complicated. It's because these conditions share a lot of the same neurological territory. Today, we're mapping that territory. What makes each condition unique, where they blur together, and why understanding the overlap might actually be the most useful thing you can do for yourself. Before we get into the specifics, I want to explain why this is so hard to sort out, even for professionals. ADHD, autism, and OCD share a lot of surface-level symptoms. Difficulty with transitions, repetitive behaviors, emotional dysregulation, trouble in social situations, sensory sensitivities, executive function challenges. When you walk into a provider's office describing those symptoms, the diagnosis you get often depends on which lens that provider is looking through. If they specialize in ADHD, they might see ADHD. If they're more familiar with anxiety, they might see OCD. If autism isn't on their radar for adults, especially women, they might miss it entirely. This is why misdiagnosis is so common, and why so many people go through years of treatment for the wrong thing, or an incomplete picture, before someone finally zooms out and sees the full map. So let's zoom out. Each of these conditions has a core mechanism, a central thing it's actually about, underneath the surface symptoms. For ADHD, the core is regulation, specifically the regulation of attention, impulse, and arousal. The ADHD brain has differences in dopamine and norepinephrine, neurotransmitters that control how the brain prioritizes, motivates, and sustains focus. The result is a brain that struggles to regulate what it pays attention to when it acts, and how activated or calm it feels. That's why ADHD can look so different person to person. One person is bouncing off the walls, another can't get off the couch. Same underlying regulation problem, completely different presentations. For autism, the core is processing. The autistic brain processes social information, sensory input, and change differently. It often processes things in more detail, more literal, and with stronger pattern recognition. That's genuinely a different cognitive style, not a deficit. The challenges come when the world expects a specific kind of social processing and sensory tolerance that the autistic brain isn't naturally built for. For OCD, the core is threat detection, specifically a misfiring threat detection system. The OCD brain flags certain thoughts as dangerous when they aren't, and then generates enormous anxiety until something is done to neutralize the perceived threat. That something is a compulsion. The compulsion brings temporary relief, which teaches the brain that the compulsion works, which means the next time the thought appears, the urge to compel is even stronger. It's a loop that tightens over time without intervention. OCD is also ego-dystonic. That means the thoughts feel foreign and distressing. They go against what the person actually believes and values. That's important to understand. Now here's where it gets interesting. These three conditions overlap in ways that are real, not coincidental. Research suggests that up to 50 to 70% of autistic people also meet criteria for ADHD. And ADHD and OCD co-occur at significantly higher rates than in the general population. The reason comes down to shared neurology. All three involve differences in how the brain processes and responds to the environment, and all three have strong genetic components that frequently travel together in families. The overlap also creates a diagnostic confusion in specific ways. Repetitive behaviors appear in both autism and OCD, but the function is different. In autism, repetitive behaviors are often regulating and pleasurable. In OCD, they're driven by anxiety and feel compulsive. Same behavior, different engine. Emotional dysregulation shows up in all three. But in ADHD, it tends to be fast and reactive, big feelings that pass quickly. In autism, it can be deeper and slower to resolve, especially after sensory overload. In OCD, it's specifically tied to the anxiety loop. Understanding which engine is driving a behavior is the key to treating it correctly, which is why having a provider who understands all three, not just one, matters so much. So if you have more than one of these, or you suspect you do, here's what I want you to take from this. First, you're not more broken for having multiple diagnoses. You're more understood. Each diagnosis is a lens that helps explain a different layer of your experience. The more accurate the picture, the better support you can get. Second, treatment needs to be layered. Treating ADHD alone when you're also autistic leaves a lot on the table. The most effective support takes the full picture into account. Third, self-knowledge is a legitimate tool. Pay attention to what your behaviors feel like from the inside. Is the repetitive thing calming to you, or is it driven by anxiety you can't shake? Is the avoidance about sensory overload, or is it about a fear of a specific outcome? That internal awareness is genuinely useful clinical information. And fourth, if something isn't working, if your ADHD meds aren't doing what they should, if therapy isn't clicking, it might be because part of the picture hasn't been identified yet. Advocate for a fuller evaluation. You deserve the complete picture. ADHD is about regulation. Autism is about processing. OCD is about threat detection. They're distinct, and they overlap. And if you're living with more than one, that combination is yours to understand and work with, not something to be ashamed of. Next episode, we're going deep on something that ties all three together: masking. The exhausting performance of pretending to be neurotypical, what it costs you, why so many of us do it without even realizing, and what unmasking actually looks like in a world that isn't always safe to do it in. Leave a comment with which combination you're working with. I'm genuinely curious, and I know other people watching are too. It helps to know you're not alone in it. See you next time.